The mockery. The day the sky changed forever. The morning of March 15th, 2157, started like any other day in Geneva. People rushed to work, children played in parks, and life moved at its usual pace. Then the sky darkened. Not with clouds, but with something far more extraordinary. 12 massive ships, each the size of a city block, descended through Earth's atmosphere like silent giants. They moved with impossible grace, their hulls shimmering with an otherworldly blue light that made the air itself seem to hum with energy. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Global Defense Command Center, watching through reinforced glass as the largest ship settled over Lake Geneva. At 52, she had spent her entire career preparing for threats from other nations, never from other worlds. Her weathered hands gripped the railing as she observed the alien vessel, its surface appearing to ripple like liquid metal in the afternoon sun. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Marcus Rivera from behind her. "We're receiving a transmission. It's in perfect English." Chen turned and walked to the communication station. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a face that was almost human, but not quite. The being had pale silver skin that seemed to glow softly, large emerald eyes that held an unsettling intelligence, and features that were too perfect, too symmetrical. When it spoke, its voice carried an odd musical quality. "Greetings, inhabitants of the third planet. I am High Commander Vextar of the Zephyrian Collective. We come bearing the gift of contact with a greater civilization. Prepare your representatives for formal diplomatic exchange." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Chen felt her heart pounding, but kept her voice steady. "Get me the UN Secretary General, and mobilize all defense units to alert Status 1. We're going in blind here." First contact protocol. 3 days later, the first official meeting took place in a hastily constructed facility near the alien landing site. The human delegation included Admiral Chen, UN Secretary General Antonio Silva, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Earth's leading xenobiologist. They approached the meeting with a mixture of excitement and caution that had kept humanity alive for millennia. The Zephyrian delegation emerged from their craft like beings from a dream. High Commander Vextar led the group, flanked by what appeared to be military officers and scientists. Their movements were fluid, almost dance-like, and their clothing seemed to shift colors as they walked. But it was their attitude that immediately struck the human representatives as troubling. "Your species has achieved basic spaceflight," Vextar observed, his tone carrying the same condescension one might use when praising a child's finger painting. "Impressive for such a young civilization. We remember when we too relied on crude chemical propulsion and primitive electronics." Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. "Your technology is fascinating. How do your ships achieve such smooth atmospheric entry?" The Zephyrian beside Vextar, introduced as Science Commander Keltoth, made a sound that might have been laughter. "We manipulate gravitational fields at the quantum level. Your species still burns fossil fuels to create thrust. It is charming in its simplicity." Admiral Chen felt her jaw tighten but maintained her diplomatic composure. "We'd be interested in learning about your defensive capabilities as well." Defensive. Military Commander Zarketh stepped forward, his silver skin bearing intricate blue markings that seemed to pulse with their own light. "Your military technologies are equally quaint. We observed your vessels and aircraft during our approach. Chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, electromagnetic radiation. We used such crude methods during our equivalent of your Stone Age." The insult was clear, but Chen pressed on. "Perhaps you could demonstrate your advanced systems." Vextar's emerald eyes glittered with what appeared to be amusement. "Of course. It would be educational for your species. The demonstration of power." The following day, the Zephyrians agreed to a technological exchange at a secure military facility in Nevada. Admiral Chen arrived with her top weapons specialists, including Colonel David Park, a veteran of 3 conflicts, and an expert in asymmetric warfare. The aliens seemed eager to display their superiority. "Observe," Commander Zarketh announced as they stood in a reinforced observation bunker. In the testing area below, several human-made targets had been arranged, including decommissioned tanks, concrete barriers, and steel plates of varying thickness. The Zephyrian weapon appeared to be nothing more than a small crystalline device that Zarketh held casually in one hand. When he activated it, a beam of intense purple energy lanced out, striking the first tank. The massive vehicle didn't explode or burn. It simply ceased to exist, its atoms scattered to the wind, leaving only a perfectly spherical crater in the ground. "Molecular disintegration," Science Commander Keltoth explained with obvious pride. "The target's atomic bonds are severed at the quantum level. Complete elimination with no residual radiation or debris." Colonel Park watched in stunned silence as target after target vanished before the alien weapon. "Impressive," he managed. "What about your defensive systems?" "Ah, yes," Zarketh seemed delighted by the question. "Our personal shields operate on multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously." He activated a device on his chest, and a faint shimmer surrounded his body. "Please, demonstrate your most powerful weapons against this barrier." Chen nodded to her weapons team. They fired everything they had: high-powered rifles, anti-tank missiles, even a focused laser system. Every projectile and energy beam was either absorbed harmlessly or deflected away from Zarketh's position. He stood unmoved, that same condescending smile on his alien features. "Your weapons cannot even threaten an individual Zephyrian, much less our ships or installations," he declared. "We have moved beyond such primitive forms of warfare. Your bullets and bombs are relics of a more savage time." But Colonel Park noticed something the aliens seemed to miss. During the demonstration, when a slower-moving projectile from an older rifle struck the shield, it caused a brief flicker in the barrier's energy pattern. The effect lasted only a fraction of a second, but Park's trained eye caught it. Growing tensions. In the weeks that followed, the Zephyrians established what they called cultural exchange centers across the globe. These facilities appeared overnight, their construction accomplished through means that human scientists couldn't begin to understand. The aliens claimed these centers would facilitate the transfer of beneficial technologies to humanity. However, reports began filtering in from around the world that painted a different picture. The Zephyrians were extracting rare earth elements from these sites without permission from local governments. When confronted, they dismissed human concerns with the same arrogant attitude they had shown from the beginning. "Your species wastes these resources," Vextar explained during an emergency UN session. "We are simply utilizing them more efficiently. Consider it payment for the privilege of contact with our civilization." Secretary General Silva's face flushed with anger. "These resources belong to the people of Earth. You cannot simply take what you want." "Cannot." The High Commander's voice took on a colder tone. "Perhaps you have forgotten that we possess technology your species cannot comprehend or resist. We have been generous in our approach to your world. Other civilizations we have encountered were not offered such courtesies." The threat was unmistakable. Admiral Chen felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the true nature of their visitors. These weren't benevolent explorers seeking peaceful contact. They were conquerors who had simply decided to take what they wanted slowly rather than all at once. The breaking point. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in the Amazon basin. Zephyrian mining operations had been expanding rapidly, stripping away precious rainforests to reach mineral deposits beneath. Local indigenous communities, supported by Brazilian military units, had begun peaceful protests against the environmental destruction. Admiral Chen was in her office when the emergency call came through. Lieutenant Rivera burst through her door, his face pale with shock. "Admiral, you need to see this immediately." The main screen showed aerial footage from Brazil, where once had stood a thriving section of rainforest. Now there was only a blackened crater stretching for miles. The Zephyrians had used their disintegration weapons on the protesters and the forest itself, erasing everything that stood in their way. Casualty reports are still coming in, Rivera said quietly. At least 3,000 people were in that area. Indigenous families, environmental scientists, Brazilian soldiers. They're all gone. Chen stared at the screen in horror. The aliens had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Get me Colonel Park," she ordered, "and contact every military commander on the planet. It's time we stopped playing their game by their rules." When Park arrived, Chen was studying tactical reports and weapon specifications. "Colonel, remember what you noticed during their shield demonstration? The flicker when the older projectile hit." "Yes, ma'am. I've been thinking about that. I want you to run every test you can think of. If these shields have a weakness, we need to find it. Because whether they know it or not, they just declared war on the human race." Park nodded grimly. "What about their superior technology?" Chen looked out the window toward the alien ship hovering over Geneva. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Our ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, and world wars with nothing but their wits and whatever weapons they could make. Maybe it's time we reminded these aliens that humans don't go down without a fight." The first part of humanity's greatest challenge was ending, but Chen knew the real test was just beginning. The Zephyrians had made the mistake that many superior forces throughout history had made. They had underestimated the determination of those they sought to dominate. Soon, they would learn why that was always a fatal error when dealing with the human species. As night fell over Earth, military bases across the globe hummed with activity. Scientists worked alongside soldiers, testing theories and preparing weapons that hadn't been used in decades. The aliens thought they knew everything about human capabilities based on their most advanced technologies. They were about to discover that sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones your enemy never sees coming. The awakening. The moment of truth. Colonel David Park crouched in the pre-dawn darkness outside the Zephyrian facility in Nevada, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. After weeks of secret testing, human scientists had finally cracked the code of the alien shields. The breakthrough had come from the most unlikely source, a museum piece from World War II. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a physicist from MIT, had made the discovery that would change everything. Their shields are calibrated for modern high-velocity projectiles and energy weapons, she had explained to the assembled military commanders, but they're not optimized for slower, heavier objects. The technology is so advanced that it has blind spots their creators never considered. The key had been found in testing various projectiles against captured shield generators. Modern bullets, traveling at high velocity, were stopped cold. But older ammunition, the kind used in wars nearly 2 centuries past, could penetrate the barriers. The shields were programmed to stop what the Zephyrians considered threats, and they had never encountered weapons they deemed primitive enough to ignore. Now Park clutched a modified rifle that would have been familiar to soldiers from Earth's bloodiest conflicts. Beside him, Sergeant Maria Santos checked her equipment one final time. "Hard to believe we're going back to basics," she whispered. "Sometimes old school is the right school," Park replied, thinking of the thousands who had died in the Amazon. "Remember, we get one chance at this. If we miss, they'll adapt their shields, and we'll never get another opportunity." Around the world, similar teams were preparing for simultaneous strikes against Zephyrian installations. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Hit every facility at once with weapons the aliens had dismissed as harmless relics. Admiral Chen had coordinated the global effort from her command center, knowing that surprise was humanity's only advantage. First blood. At exactly 400 hours GMT, Colonel Park squeezed his trigger. The heavy slug from his modified rifle struck the Zephyrian guard's personal shield and passed through like it was made of air. The alien's expression of shocked disbelief was the last thing he would ever see. Alarms began wailing across the facility as human special forces emerged from concealment. The Zephyrians, caught completely off guard, scrambled to activate their advanced weapons. But the humans were already among them, using tactics that had been refined in countless conflicts across Earth's violent history. "Target their communication arrays first," Park shouted as his team moved through the facility. The aliens' superior technology meant nothing if they couldn't coordinate their response. Explosive charges, planted by infiltration teams over the past week, detonated simultaneously across the compound. The Zephyrians tried to bring their disintegration weapons to bear, but the close-quarters combat negated their advantage. These beings had grown accustomed to warfare fought at long range with energy weapons. They had never developed tactics for the brutal, personal nature of human combat. Sergeant Santos moved with lethal efficiency, her shotgun loaded with specially designed slugs that tore through alien shields like paper. "They're falling back to the central building," she reported over the radio. Global uprising. Reports flooded into Admiral Chen's command center from around the world. The simultaneous strikes were succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. In China, human forces had overrun the Zephyrian mining facility in less than 20 minutes. Brazilian troops, seeking vengeance for their slaughtered comrades, had taken their target with such ferocity that the aliens had fled without even attempting to fight back. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Rivera called out, "we're receiving panic transmissions from the Zephyrian ships. They're trying to recall all ground forces immediately." Chen allowed herself a grim smile. "Tell our people to press the advantage. Don't give them time to regroup or adapt." High Commander Vextar's voice suddenly filled the command center, his previous arrogance replaced by barely controlled panic. "Admiral Chen, we demand an immediate ceasefire. This unprovoked aggression against our personnel will not be tolerated." "Unprovoked?" Chen's voice was ice-cold. "You murdered 3,000 innocent people in Brazil. You've been stealing our resources and threatening our world. This is just us returning the favor. You cannot hope to stand against our technology." Vextar protested, but his voice lacked its former confidence. "Your technology isn't as advanced as you thought," Chen replied. "Sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. Adaptation and counterattack." The Zephyrians were not passive victims. As reports of their ground forces' defeats reached their command ships, they began analyzing the human attacks. Science Commander Keltoth worked frantically to understand how their shields had been penetrated. "Impossible," he muttered as data streamed across his displays. "These projectiles should be incapable of threatening our defenses." Military Commander Zarkev's silver skin had taken on a darker hue, a sign of extreme stress among his species. "How could we have miscalculated so badly?" "We didn't miscalculate," Vextar said grimly. "We underestimated. We assumed that because their advanced weapons couldn't harm us, their primitive ones would be even less effective. We never considered that they might deliberately choose inferior technology." The aliens quickly began modifying their shield systems to account for slower projectiles, but the humans had anticipated this response. Admiral Chen had prepared for a longer conflict, one that would test humanity's ability to adapt and improvise. "They'll update their defenses," she had told her commanders during the planning phase. "But every adjustment they make creates new vulnerabilities. We just have to stay one step ahead." Human engineers, working around the clock, developed new variations of their primitive weapons. Crossbows firing specially designed bolts, catapults launching explosive projectiles, even slings hurling metal spheres at precisely calculated velocities. Each weapon was designed to exploit specific weaknesses in the evolving Zephyrian defenses. The tide turns. The conflict escalated as both sides adapted to their enemies' capabilities. The Zephyrians, frustrated by their ground forces' losses, began using their ship-based weapons against human population centers. Cities around the world suffered devastating attacks as purple energy beams carved through buildings and infrastructure. But humanity had faced extinction before and survived. Emergency governments formed in underground bunkers, coordination networks established through methods the aliens couldn't track. Human resistance cells, armed with their primitive but effective weapons, began conducting guerrilla operations against Zephyrian positions. Captain Elena Vasquez led one such cell in the ruins of Madrid. Her team had perfected the art of close-quarters combat against shielded opponents, using everything from medieval weapons to improvised explosives. "The key is unpredictability," she explained to new recruits. "They can adapt to our weapons, but they can't adapt to our thinking." Her unit's greatest success came when they captured a Zephyrian command post using nothing but crossbows and hand-thrown grenades. The aliens, expecting high-tech assaults, were completely unprepared for medieval siege tactics applied with modern military precision. Breaking point. The turning point came when human forces managed to board one of the smaller Zephyrian ships. Colonel Park led the assault team, their weapons a mixture of old and new that confused the ship's defensive systems. Boarding axes and plasma cutters, muskets and magnetic mines, all used in combination to overwhelm the aliens' ability to respond. Their whole civilization is built around energy-based technology, Park observed as his team fought through the ship's corridors. They've forgotten that sometimes you need to hit something with a big stick. The capture of the ship provided humanity with invaluable intelligence about Zephyrian weaknesses. Dr. Martinez, analyzing the alien technology, made a startling discovery. Their entire fleet runs on interconnected systems, she reported to Admiral Chen. If we can introduce the right kind of interference. Chen understood immediately. A virus. Not digital. Martinez smiled. Physical. Their systems expect high-tech attacks, so they filter out anything that seems too primitive to be a threat. But if we could get close enough to their main ships. The final gambit. The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. Using captured alien technology combined with deliberately primitive delivery systems, human forces would attempt to disable the Zephyrian fleet from within. Volunteers would approach the ships using methods so basic that the alien sensors would dismiss them as irrelevant. Lieutenant Sarah Kim found herself floating in space, wearing a modified EVA suit and carrying what appeared to be a simple metallic sphere. Her approach vector was calculated to look like debris from the ongoing battle. The Zephyrian ship's sensors, programmed to ignore non-threatening objects, never detected her approach. Similar missions were underway around the globe. Human ingenuity, combined with their enemies' arrogance, created opportunities that no advanced civilization would have thought possible. Hot air balloons carrying explosive charges, swimmers using primitive diving equipment to plant mines, even trained birds carrying small devices to enemy installations. Victory from the jaws of defeat. When the coordinated attack began, the Zephyrians finally understood the true nature of their enemy. Humans didn't just use primitive weapons out of necessity. They used them because primitiveness was itself a weapon against advanced thinking. High Commander Vextar watched in horror as his fleet's systems began failing one by one. The human infiltrators had introduced disruption devices that his sensors couldn't detect because they operated on principles his civilization had abandoned millennia ago. How is this possible? He demanded as his flagship's power systems fluctuated. Science Commander Keltoth stared at his displays in disbelief. They're using mechanical timers, chemical reactions, even biological components. Our systems are designed to counter sophisticated attacks. Not this. As Zephyrian ships began falling from the sky, their crews evacuating in escape pods, Admiral Chen opened a communication channel to the alien fleet. High Commander Vextar, this is Admiral Chen. I believe we need to discuss terms. Vextar's image appeared on screen, his perfect features marred by defeat and confusion. We underestimated your species, he admitted. We thought primitiveness was weakness. That's where you went wrong, Chen replied. For humans, primitiveness is just another tool. We use whatever works, whether it's a quantum computer or a sharp stick. The measure of a weapon isn't how advanced it is, but how effectively it accomplishes its purpose. Aftermath and understanding. The war ended not with humanity's destruction, but with the Zephyrians' grudging respect. As both species worked to establish a new relationship based on equality rather than domination, important lessons were learned on both sides. Colonel Park, now promoted to general, stood in the ruins of the Nevada facility where the conflict had begun. Beside him, former military commander Zarketh examined a display case containing some of the primitive weapons that had turned the tide of battle. "We made a fundamental error," Zarketh admitted, his silver skin showing patterns that indicated deep contemplation. "We assumed that technological advancement meant abandoning all previous methods. Your species kept all its tools, from the most primitive to the most advanced." Park nodded. "My grandfather once told me that the best tool for any job is the one that gets the job done. Sometimes that's a computer. Sometimes it's a hammer." Dr. Martinez, working alongside Zephyrian scientists to understand both civilizations' technologies, had perhaps the most important insight. "We both made the same mistake in different ways," she observed. "They thought advanced meant better in all situations. We thought primitive meant worthless. The truth is that every tool has its place." The conflict between humans and Zephyrians became a turning point for both civilizations. The aliens learned to appreciate the value of maintaining diverse approaches to problem solving, while humans gained access to technologies that would reshape their world. More importantly, both species learned that true strength comes not from the sophistication of one's weapons, but from the wisdom to know when and how to use them. In the end, the Zephyrians' mockery of human primitive weapons had been their downfall. They had laughed at bullets and bombs, dismissing them as relics of a savage past. But they learned too late that in the hands of a determined species, even the simplest weapon could be devastating. The humans had fired first, not because they were aggressive, but because they understood a truth their technologically superior enemies had forgotten. In any conflict, victory goes not to the side with the best weapons, but to the side that uses their weapons best. The universe was a dangerous place, filled with species that had forgotten the lessons of their own evolution. But as long as humans remembered where they came from and maintained respect for all the tools that had brought them so far, they would never be defenseless against those who thought advancement meant abandoning the past. Sometimes, the oldest ways were indeed the best ways.